Before we dive into today's story, I want to thank you all for being here. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a moment of the drama. What you're about to hear is a testament to the fact that you should never, ever underestimate the person standing quietly in the corner. They're the ones you have to watch out for. Now, let's get into it. She's gone, Mr. Gable. Eleanor. She passed just a few minutes ago. We did everything we could. The nurse's voice was a practiced monotone of sympathy, a sound she had likely perfected over thousands of similar announcements. Her name was Brenda, a younger woman with sharp eyes that didn't match the soft words leaving her lips. They looked at me, but they didn't see me. They saw a checklist item, notify next of kin. Done. The world tilted on its axis. Gone? No, it wasn't possible. We had just been talking hours ago. Her voice was weak, a thread of sound in the sterile silence of the ICU, but it was there. She had squeezed my hand. She had whispered my name. Artie, she'd said, her eyes fluttering. Don't you leave me, and I hadn't. For 48 straight hours, I hadn't left that uncomfortable vinyl chair, my world shrinking to the rhythmic beep of her heart monitor and the rise and fall of her chest. How could she be gone? The beeping had only just stopped. They had rushed me out of the room so quickly, a blur of blue scrubs and urgent, meaningless platitudes. Sir, please wait outside. We need space to work. I stared at Nurse Brenda, my mind a hollow cavern where coherent thought had just been violently evicted. No, I managed the word a dry rasp. I was just with her. She was fighting. The fight is over now, Mr. Gable, Brenda said, placing a cool hand on my arm. The touch was meant to be comforting, but it felt like a brand. It felt proprietary. She's at peace. It's best to let her go. Let her go. The words echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my mind. Let go of the woman who had been my anchor, my compass, my entire world for 47 years. The girl I'd met at university library, her nose buried in a book of poetry, a stray curl of auburn hair falling across her cheek. The young woman who had said, I do, under a canopy of oak trees, her smile brighter than the summer sun. The partner who had held my hand through job losses, through the joy of building our own home nail by nail, through the quiet sorrow of never having the children we'd so desperately wanted. Let her go. It was like asking me to let go of the air in my lungs. My knees buckled. I leaned against the cool, indifferent wall of the hospital corridor, the harsh fluorescent lights beating down on me. My niece-in-law, Chloe, Eleanor's only living relative besides me, appeared at Brenda's side. She wrapped an arm around me, her own grief a loud, theatrical performance. Oh, Uncle Arthur, I'm so sorry. She's in a better place. Chloe's perfume, something cloyingly sweet, filled my nostrils, making me nauseous. I couldn't stand her. Eleanor had always had a blind spot for her sister's daughter, seeing a lost little girl instead of the calculating, materialistic woman I saw. Over the past few years, as Eleanor's health declined, Chloe had become a constant presence, her concern always seeming to circle back to one thing, Eleanor's estate. Aunt Ellie, you have to make sure your affairs are in order, she'd say, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. You don't want that old house to become a burden for Arthur. Eleanor had a significant inheritance from her parents, something Chloe was keenly aware of. I had my pension, our house was paid off, we were comfortable. We didn't need Eleanor's family money, but Chloe acted as if it were her birthright. I pushed away from her embrace, needing space, needing to breathe. They thought the fight was over. They thought they had won. They had no idea the war had just begun. That was the thought that flashed through my mind, a cold, harsh shard of something I didn't recognize. It wasn't grief. It was something else, something primal. I closed my eyes, trying to summon one last image of my wife's face, the real one, not the pale, still mask I imagined was lying in that room. I just wanted to hear her voice one more time. And then I did. It was faint, so faint I thought my mind had finally snapped a final desperate trick of a grieving psyche. A whisper, carried on the sterile, recycled air of the hallway. Artie. My eyes shot open. I froze, Every muscle in my body tensed. It was her voice. Weak, distorted, but unmistakably Eleanor. It came from down the hall, from the direction of her room. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, turning to Brenda and Chloe. Chloe's face was a mask of pity. "Hear what, Uncle Arthur? There's nothing there. You're in shock. It's completely normal." "No," I insisted, my voice gaining strength. "I heard her. I heard Eleanor." Nurse Brenda's professional smile tightened. "Mr. Gable, grief can play tricks on the mind. You've been through a tremendous ordeal. Why don't we get you some water? Chloe can take you down to the cafeteria." She was trying to move me, to get me away from that room. The cold shard in my gut sharpened into a point. Something was wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. I looked from Brenda's hard, dismissive eyes to Chloe's overly solicitous face, and for the first time, I saw the invisible thread connecting them. A flicker of a shared glance, a subtle tension in their shoulders. It was a conspiracy of two. "I want to see my wife," I said, my voice low and steady. "I don't think that's a good idea," Brenda said quickly, stepping in front of me, physically blocking my path to the door. "The team is still in there, preparing her. It's better to remember her as she was, full of life. Preparing her." The clinical term sent a wave of revulsion through me. But the voice had been real. I was an engineer by trade, a man who dealt in facts, in evidence, in things that could be measured and proven. I did not believe in ghosts, which meant there was only one other possibility. I let them lead me away. I played the part they had cast for me, the broken, confused old man, shattered by grief. I let Chloe guide me to a chair in the waiting area, let her press a cup of lukewarm water into my trembling hands. I nodded numbly as she spoke of funeral arrangements and probate, her words a meaningless buzz in my ears. But behind my vacant stare, my mind was racing, gears that had been dormant for years grinding back to life. I was no longer a husband mourning his wife. I was an engineer with a problem to solve, and the first step was to gather data. I remembered the day Eleanor had signed the new power of attorney, just 6 months ago. We were in her lawyer's office. I had always been her power of attorney, but Chloe had convinced her it was too much of a burden for me. "Uncle Arthur has so much on his plate, taking care of you day in and day out," she had cooed, placing a manicured hand on Eleanor's arm. "Let me handle the boring paperwork, the bills. I'm young. I have the energy. It would be my honor to help." Eleanor, weakened by her illness and flattered by the attention, had agreed. She'd made Chloe her primary agent for financial and medical decisions. I had argued against it, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "Ellie, I don't trust her," I'd said that night. Eleanor had patted my hand. "Oh, Artie, you're too cynical. She's family. She just wants to help." Now, that signature on that piece of paper felt like a death warrant. My plan began to form. I needed to get back into that room. I told Chloe I needed to use the restroom, and she pointed me down the hall, her attention already shifting to her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. I walked past the restroom and circled back around the long way, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I approached Eleanor's room from the opposite direction. The door was slightly ajar. I peered through the crack. The room was empty. The bed was stripped, the machine silent. It was as if she had never been there. My blood ran cold. Where is she? If she wasn't dead, and she wasn't here, where had they taken her? I slipped inside, my rubber-soled shoes silent on the linoleum. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic. I scanned the room, my engineers looking for anything out of place. On the floor, half-kicked under the bedside table, was a small, clear plastic cap from the top of a syringe vial. That wasn't unusual in a hospital room. But next to it was a tiny, wadded-up piece of paper. I picked it up. It was a label peeled from a vial. My hands shook as I smoothed it out. The drug name was obscured by a dark smudge, but I could make out the dosage and, more importantly, the pharmacy stamp. It wasn't the hospital's standard pharmacy. It was from a private, out-of-state supplier I'd never heard of. This was my first piece of evidence. I carefully folded the label and tucked it deep into my pocket. I needed more. I looked at the small whiteboard on the wall where nurses wrote notes. It had been wiped clean, but a faint ghost of the previous writing remained, visible only when the light hit it at a certain angle. I could make out a few words. Transport. 7 p.m. Northwood, Northwood. What was Northwood? My phone was my next tool. I locked myself in a bathroom stall and began searching. Northwood Care Facility. The results were sparse. It had a bare-bones website, full of stock photos of smiling seniors and vague promises of discreet, personalized long-term care. It wasn't a hospital. It looked more like a private hospice, but something about it felt off. The address was in a remote, rural area over 100 miles away. Discreet. The word jumped out at me. A place to hide someone. A place to make someone disappear. The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying speed. They hadn't killed her. Not yet. That would be too risky, too messy. Their plan was far more insidious. They had used some unapproved, heavy sedative to induce a state that mimicked death, a drug that wouldn't show up on a standard hospital toxicology screen. With a forged declaration of death signed by a complicit doctor, Chloe, as power of attorney, would have free reign over Eleanor's assets. Meanwhile, they would move my wife, my living, breathing wife, to this remote facility, keeping her sedated and hidden away from the world until she inevitably wasted away from neglect. They're going to bury her alive, metaphorically and then literally. The sheer evil of it took my breath away. The grief I had felt earlier was consumed by a white-hot, righteous fury. They hadn't just underestimated a grieving husband. They had underestimated the man who had promised to love and protect Eleanor until his dying day. My dying day, not hers. I went back to the waiting room. Chloe looked up from her phone, her expression a perfect blend of concern and impatience. There you are, Arthur. I was getting worried. I started making some calls to the funeral home. I thought it best to get things moving. That's very efficient of you, Chloe, I said, my voice eerily calm. I had to maintain the facade. I was the broken old man. That was my camouflage. My head is spinning. I can't think straight. Of course you can't, she said, patting my arm. Don't you worry about a thing. I'll handle everything. Oh, I knew she would. I let her drive me home, her chatter about caskets and floral arrangements washing over me. In my own home, the silence was a physical presence. Everywhere I looked, I saw Eleanor. Her reading glasses on the nightstand. Her favorite mug by the sink. The half-finished sweater still on its needles in her knitting basket. A fresh wave of real grief washed over me, so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. I was mourning a woman who was still alive. This was the fuel I needed. I let the pain turn to steel in my spine. The first call I made was to David Chun, my old friend and former colleague. David wasn't just an engineer. He was a cybersecurity genius who had left the corporate world to start his own private investigation firm. He specialized in finding things that didn't want to be found. Artie, it's after midnight. Is everything okay? His voice was groggy, but instantly alert. David, I need your help, I said, keeping my voice low. It's Eleanor. I explained everything. The nurse, the whispered voice, Chloe, the drug label Northwood. I laid out my hypothesis with the cold precision of an engineer presenting a technical report. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Artie, he finally said, his voice grave. This is insane. Are you sure you're not just, I'm not grieving, David. I'm fighting a war. I cut him off. I heard her. I know what I heard. And I know what they're planning. I need you to find everything you can on this Northwood facility, on Nurse Brenna Michaels, and on any recent financial activity from Chloe Jennings. I need irrefutable proof. Okay, Artie. Okay, I'm on it, he said, the doubt in his voice replaced by resolve. Keep your phone on. And for God's sake, be careful. These people are not just greedy. They're dangerous. The next few hours were the longest of my life. I paced the floors of our silent house, a caged animal. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sit still. I was a machine running on adrenaline and rage. At 4 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an encrypted email from David. The contents were chilling. Northwood Care Facility was a shell company owned by another shell company, which was in turn registered to a P.O. box. But David had dug deeper. He'd found the name on the property deed, Dr. Alistair Finch. A quick search on Dr. Finch revealed a troubling history. He was a physician who had lost his license in 2 states for medical malpractice, including illegal prescription practices. He was the corrupt doctor. Nurse Brenda Michaels had a gambling problem. David found records of large cash deposits into her bank account over the past few months, deposits that far exceeded her salary. The source? Untraceable wire transfers from an offshore account. But the timing of the last deposit was damning. Yesterday afternoon. And then there was Chloe. David had access to her emails. It was all there in black and white. A chain of correspondence between her, Brenda, and Dr. Finch, outlining the entire plan. They called it the transition. They discussed the specific drug cocktail to be used, the logistics of the transport, the timing of the forged death certificate. They even had a timeline for liquidating Eleanor's assets, starting with her portfolio of stocks the very next morning. I printed everything, my hands steady. This was the ammunition I needed. They planned to move her at 7 p.m. that evening. I had less than 12 hours to save my wife. My strategy had to be perfect. I couldn't just storm in. They would deny everything, and by the time the police got a warrant, Eleanor would be gone. I needed to catch them in the act. I had to set a trap and make them walk right into it. I spent the morning playing the part of the bereaved. I called our friends and family, my voice cracking with feigned sorrow as I delivered the false news of Eleanor's passing. Every lie I told was a dagger in my own heart, but it was necessary. I needed Chloe to believe she had won, that I was a non-threat, a relic to be managed and eventually discarded. She called me around noon. "Uncle Arthur, I'm at the funeral home. I need you to come sign some papers. Can you be here in an hour?" "Of course, dear," I said, my voice a weak imitation of my own. "Whatever you need." This was my chance. While she was busy with her ghoulish preparations, I would return to the hospital. I called the hospital's chief administrator, a man named Mr. Harrison whom I had met at a fundraiser years ago. I didn't tell him the full story. You don't lead with a conspiracy theory. You lead with a problem they can't ignore. "Mr. Harrison, my name is Arthur Gable. My wife, Eleanor, was a patient in your ICU. She was pronounced dead last night." I paused, letting the gravity of it sink in. "I have reason to believe there has been a catastrophic medical error and a serious breach of hospital protocol. I have evidence that my wife may not be deceased and that a crime is in progress on your premises. I need you and your head of security to meet me outside room 304 at exactly 6:45 p.m. in this evening. Do not alert the floor staff. Please, just trust me. A single wrong move could be fatal." My tone, calm and authoritative, left no room for argument. I was no longer a grieving husband. I was an engineer reporting a critical system failure. He agreed, his voice tight with alarm. Next, I called the police. I asked for a specific detective, a woman I'd read about in the paper who had cracked a complex financial fraud case. I gave her the same story, but with more detail, emailing her David's entire file as we spoke. I told her to be at the same place at the same time, but to remain out of sight until I gave a signal. The trap was set. The bait was me. I met Chloe at the funeral home. I moved through the motions like an automaton, signing papers, nodding at her suggestions for the service. She was in her element, a director orchestrating a play where she was the sole beneficiary. Her condescension was palpable. "Don't you worry your little gray head about the costs, Uncle Arthur," she said with a smug smile. "Aunt Ellie's estate can handle it. It's the least we can do to give her the send-off she deserves." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I left the funeral home and drove not home, but back to the hospital. I sat in my car in the parking garage, watching the clock. 6:30 p.m. I walked into the hospital, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I was wearing the suit I had been married in. It felt appropriate. It was a declaration of my vow to Eleanor. I arrived on the third floor at 6:44 p.m. As promised, Mr. Harrison was there, along with a stern-looking man in a suit who must have been his head of security. I saw two plainclothes officers, including the detective I had spoken to, pretending to read pamphlets down the hall. Everything was in place. At 6:50 p.m., the elevator doors opened. Nurse Brenda emerged, pushing a gurney. Dr. Finch, a weaselly man with shifty eyes, was with her, and behind them was Chloe. On the gurney was a body, covered completely by a white sheet. They were moving her. They saw me and stopped short. Chloe was the first to recover. Uncle Arthur, what are you doing here? You should be at home resting. I had some unfinished business, I said, my voice ringing out in the quiet corridor. I took a step forward, positioning myself between them and the elevator. Now is not the time, Mr. Gable, Nurse Brenda said, her voice sharp, the sympathetic mask gone. We are transporting your wife's body. Please, show some respect. My wife's body, I said, raising an eyebrow. That's what you think that is? A body? An object to be disposed of after you've emptied her bank accounts. Chloe gasped, a perfect performance of shock. What are you talking about? You're not well, Arthur. Grief is making you delusional. Oh, I'm more lucid than I've ever been, I replied calmly. I looked at Brenda. Tell me, Brenda, does a salary of $60,000 a year cover your gambling debts? Or did you need those offshore wire transfers to stay afloat? Her face went pale. The color drained from it as if a plug had been pulled. I don't know what you're talking about. I turned to the doctor. And you, Dr. Finch, is forging a death certificate part of the standard of care here? Or is that an extra service you provide after having your medical license revoked in 2 other states? Finch began to tremble, his eyes darting around for an escape route. Finally, I looked at Chloe. The smugness was gone, replaced by a flicker of panic. And you, Chloe, dearest Chloe, did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was so old and stupid that I would just let you sedate my wife, declare her dead, hide her away in some remote facility, and steal everything she's ever worked for? This is insane, she shrieked, her voice high and strained. He's lost his mind. Security. Security is already here, I said, nodding my head slightly. On that signal, Mr. Harrison and his security chief stepped forward. The plainclothes detectives moved in from the other end of the hall, cutting off their retreat. Their trap was now my cage for them. What is the meaning of this? Chloe demanded, her voice shaking with rage and fear. I ignored her and walked to the gurney. My hand trembled as I reached for the corner of the white sheet. You made one critical mistake, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You thought my love for her was as weak and disposable as your greed. You thought 47 years of devotion could be erased by a piece of paper and a syringe. I pulled back the sheet. It was Eleanor. She was pale, frighteningly still, an oxygen tube under her nose, but her chest was rising and falling in a slow, shallow rhythm. She was alive. A single tear traced a path down my cheek, a tear of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. At that moment, as if sensing my presence, her eyelids fluttered. Her lips parted, and a single, weak whisper escaped. Artie! The sound, as faint as it was a thunderclap in the silent hallway. It was the sound of their world collapsing. Chloe stared, her mouth agape, her face a grotesque mask of disbelief and horror. Brenda let out a small, strangled sob. Dr. Finch looked like he was about to faint. That, I said, turning to face the detective, my voice ringing with absolute certainty, is the voice of my wife. A woman these 3 individuals attempted to murder for financial gain. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Chloe, Brenda, and Dr. Finch were taken into custody without a word, their faces etched with the stunned realization of their utter defeat. The looks on their faces as the handcuffs clicked shut was a moment of dark, satisfying vindication I will carry with me forever. They were so arrogant, so sure of their own cleverness, that they never once considered the possibility that the quiet old man in the corner was anything other than a piece of furniture. Eleanor was rushed back to the ICU, but this time to a different room, with a new team of doctors who looked at me with a mixture of awe and respect. I sat by her bedside, holding her hand, not as a mourner, but as a guardian. The sedatives they had used were potent, and it took 2 full days for her to regain full consciousness. The first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was my face. Artie, she whispered, her voice still weak but clear. You're here. I'm here, my love, I said, squeezing her hand. I never left. I never had to tell her the full, sordid story. Her lawyers and the police handled that. All she needed to know was that she was safe and that the people who had tried to harm her would never be able to hurt anyone again. The legal proceedings were a formality. With the evidence from David's investigation and the three of them being caught red-handed, their confessions came quickly, each one trying to blame the others. They were all found guilty. Chloe, the mastermind, received the longest sentence. Her inheritance, the one she was willing to kill for, would be spent on lawyers and commissary snacks for the next 25 years. Months have passed. Eleanor is home now. She's still weak, and her recovery is slow, but every day she gets a little stronger. We sit on the porch in the evenings, just like we used to, and watch the sun set. Sometimes she'll reach for my hand and just hold it, a silent acknowledgement of the battle I fought for her, for us. In those moments, I don't feel like a hero. I just feel like a husband. They thought I was just a sad old man, a relic from a bygone era, easily fooled and easily dismissed. But they forgot who I was fighting for. They forgot that love, true, abiding love, is the most powerful force on earth. It can turn a quiet engineer into a warrior. It can uncover the most despicable lies. And it can and will always win. So if you've ever been underestimated, if someone has ever looked at you and seen less than what you are, let me know your story in the comments below. Your strength might be quieter, but that doesn't make it any less real. Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already, please smash that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice served. You won't regret it.